trying out these two new fermenting systems?
Yeah, one was cylindro-conicals and the other was a tower fermenter. And the tower fermenter was interesting, great experience. Mike Spillane was helping to run it, who would later became my boss and production director. He was their pilot brewer, effectively, at the time. But he was coordinating it, and they were running the and that's part of the reason why I came in, because they took one of the shift brewers at the time to help with these projects. But so they were trialing the cylindro-conicals, which is fine because that's just a separate, different sort of fermentation vessel. I mean, in all intents and purposes, not significantly different, apart from the bottom to a porter tun. You know, it was tall, it was narrow, it was round. You know, so. But obviously very much updated. And the tower fermenter, but the tower fermenter required wort to be fed into it almost continuously. It was a continuous fermentation, and you had to have vessels to receive wort, keep it sterile, or repasteurize it before it went into the tower fermenter, and then you had to have vessels continuously receiving them. So it was quite an art to get going. I mean, Bass persevered with them. Bass put quite a few in, as did two other breweries, I think. I can't remember where. San Miguel had one running for a long time. New Zealand had them in.
Didn't it come from New Zealand?
Yes and no, but not that system. What New Zealand had was the system that Mortlake adopted, which was continuous, but in three big vessels. So it passed from one vessel into another, which was the Coots continuous system, I think it was called, where you just kept filling one vessel and that sort of fermented and then passed over, a bit like a sewage works, over into another one, and then another one. So, and that they all fell apart in the end, mainly because it's quite difficult to produce wort continuously and get it ready to pass through. So you have to have receiving vessels, and it doesn't take long to ferment beer. So, it was, but all the Lion beer was made by continuous fermentation on that three vessel system.
But how did it taste?
It tasted all right. No, I mean, I think they developed it over time. All the Worthington E was produced on these APV towers for a while. They used to blend it in, but Worthington E, I think he was almost primarily brewed with this, or Long Life, one or the other. I can't remember now. I know that the Long Life was the Skol lager with a bit of caramel put in the end.
Oh, was it?
Well, that's what it was based on, more or less.
Well, I had some things about Long Life. Because I got all these things from the Sunday Mirror, these analyses of beers from the 1970s, and one that turned up there was Long Life.
Yeah. Oh, it was a nice beer, actually, of its day. I didn't mind Long Life. It was brewed as a lager, pretty much, a bit darker coloured. I mean, I think we slightly joked that it was Skol, slightly stronger Skol with a bit of colour in it, but I don't think it was far off what it was.
So stout. You said that there was still being occasional brews of stout.
Very occasional brews of stout. Yeah, Eagle Stout. Yeah, not much in the time I was there. We're still doing a lot of milds.
Yeah.
So, and what you would do would be, in the end, to parti-gyle it off the mild. So the first worts that you get off are the slight, but the Eagle Stout wasn't that strong from memory. I think we just, I'm trying to remember now how it differed from the brown ale, but it did differ. as I say, it wasn't brewed very often. So it's, and I've not found it in the brewing records. You can look it up, Ron. That's your area of expertise and access, mate.
Well, the last ones I've got, I've
in the 60s and 70s. But,
yeah, no, I've got some stuff from the 30s.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was a lot more being brewed then, of course.
Yeah, which aren't actual proper brewing records, but which are like a costing document.
Ah, right, yeah.
But it gives the full list of ingredients,
right,
and it gives the gravity. So you've actually got a lot of stuff there.
A fair idea, yeah.
Yeah, so in the book I've just published yesterday about Stout, London Stout, I've got a couple of recipes that I took from that, which I think from either the 20s or the 30s.
Yeah.
So I think it was Best Stout and London Stout, I think they were called at the time.
Quite likely. I mean, Mild was dropping year on year when I got there, and of course lager was starting to come on. But keg beer really took off quite, and tank beer. We were producing tank beer for a while into bigger accounts and pubs and things. And
okay, so the tank beer, was that pasteurized?
Yes, yeah. In our case, it was.
Well, the thing that I always wonder about tank beer is, who cleaned the tanks?
Well, it depends on the tanks that you had. Some would bring back. We had the ones with a giant bag in, so they were demountable, and you took out the bag. You brought it off. You took out the bag, and you put a new bag in. But they did have some which you had a spray ball in, and you connect it onto a little. So it's just like a vessel that you take around.
Okay.
So, but we would fill it at the brewery, and yes, there was a pasteurizer in line. Yeah.
Okay, and then that was served what, with top pressure or with?
Well, in the case in the ones with the bags, you could top pressure it with air.
Okay.
It's carbonated, so it's a bit like a poly keg, key keg.
Oh, okay, so you just put air pressure on the outside of the bag.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, because obviously it's not going into the beer; you're just pushing it down to the bag.
Yeah, and so that'd be served through what, like a keg font?
Yeah. So, but that didn't last long down in the south. It was much bigger in the north, and we only did it for certain accounts. We had some big things like the holiday camps. I mean, we were supplying, because we had a stores in Margate and another one somewhere, Colchester, I think. We were supplying some of these big holiday camp accounts, and they would get through quite a lot of beer. During the summer, and I think at one time we had the account, which then became a courage bass account. I think one of the riverboats in the Thames used to take this stuff as well. So different places. Yeah.
So so the people on the brewing side, did you have much contact with the pub side of the business?
Well, yes and no. We did, because, I mean, to start off with, we did, in as much as we were sent round sometimes in the lab. When I was in the lab doing samples, we would have to analyse the beer coming back from the pubs. So you had a bit of liaison there, and we had a sample room. And it was a vertically integrated brewery. So the sales team would come in and meet up with the brewers in the sample room, and I didn't know them very well, but yeah, it was all one. And we had an on-site sports club and a canteen, well, 7 or 8 different bits of eating establishments in the place. So it was all, yes. When the new brewery was rebuilt, we did put in a bar, and there was a bit still, but at that point, pretty much we became Watney Man Truman Brewers, and the trade side was was taken out and moved completely away from site. While we were on site, you always get a bit of interchange, but when it all became, we became pretty much just. But for a while, the headquarters and the trade teams, the people who looked after the free trade and the Thai trade, were all based in Brick Lane. Maxwell Joseph, who was an East Ender, it was his jewelry and his crown, effectively, and he rebuilt it. He rebuilt a big office block. The brewery was almost a side shoot. We were almost an add-on to the rest of this big glass building, which still exists, is still there. So, where he built that was on the front of the original mash tun stage and where the outlets were, and at the front of the brewery. I got small pictures somewhere. I've got a little presentation I did. I can't have to find where it is. I'm not very good at finding these things. But I did. I went into the Truman Brewery and the people that are there now and gave a little talk about what it used to be.
Okay.
So, yeah.
That must have been fun.
Yeah, it was. It was quite good fun.
Well, it was nice when you took us around the other year when I was over with the Goose Island people, and you were showing us stuff in the brewery. It's
old breweries are great. So I mean, the Brewery History Society does a fantastic job of visiting these breweries and keeping the history of brewing alive, really. And there's a lot to these old techniques and methods. I mean, the craft industry is a bit like Dovetail. They look back. Well, you see these ways, and why did they do that? And, whoa, now I can see why.
Well,
because it makes a difference.
Well, I've had some people, home brewers on the web will say, oh, these old techniques, they've been replaced because people came up with something better. And that's not always the case.
No.
Often it's just the case they came up with something cheaper.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not something that was better.
No, I don't think that's the case. No, I think that people have reached back for beer styles in terms of the craft sector. They've reached back for beer styles. But you need to also look back at beer equipment and or brewing equipment and how the brewers were using it. Even if you've got the same equipment, one brewer will use it different to another. So it's you need to look into some of that sometimes to see how they get the differences in flavour and character of their beers.
Well, I mean, when I was researching my stout book, I did a lot of recipes, but I also included the mashing details.
Yeah.
And the number of different ways that the London brewers were mashing.
Yeah.
And how complicated the mash schemes were.
Yeah.
So you've got them, even in the 20th century, they're using multiple mashes still.
Oh, yeah. Well, you remember that lovely brew that you and I did when we went through the books when I first met you, really, and we went through the books and we found the point where they used a Stills masher or a Maitland masher at the time, I think that before they got the Stills masher in, to do a mash and then sparge, as opposed to using the rakes in the tun.
Yeah.
We found the first brew that happened on back in the 1890s, and that was, for me, that was fascinating because I hadn't worked out why they still had. If you looked at the old mash tun in one of them, still had the rake gear. You could see where the rakes were.
Oh, that's
we were talking about it. You mash, you run the first worts, you mash in another lot of liquor, stir it all up, and then you run the second worts.
Or what you also can do is you also need rakes for underlet mashing. So if you you do the first mash and then you let in a smaller quantity of hot liquid underneath. Which is so prevalent. It's like running.
We always underlet.
Yeah, running all the way through. I see this.
It was standard practice.
And it was a real surprise for me because what people normally say is, once people started sparging, it was all just a single infusion and then a couple of sparges.
No, you'd underlet, particularly on the big tons. I mean, the theory of underletting really was that warm up everything on that bit that's a bit colder at the bottom, but also to clear the plates so that you had a good chance to run. You didn't really underlet at speed unless you were trying to break it up and it had clogged, but you just did it really to lift it and drive anything which had got stuck in the plate so that you had a reasonable run from then on.
Okay.
Just a bit. I mean, it wasn't a huge amount. It's only in our big tons, it was about 15 barrels, I think, underlet from memory.
Yeah.
You see it in the book. It's always there.
Yeah.
And I did originally think I would want to do it in Wimbledon. But we underlet at Young's, we underlet at Fuller's. It's not unusual. It's fairly common. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's just it's just these techniques which seem to have had a very long life.
Yeah. The thing with the rakes, though, in that first wort running, of course, is that first wort was taken off and boiled. As part of that, that was boiling while you then run the second one, either into the pan above the kettle. You're running the second worts up there, and then you'll drop that. So your kettle was smaller with a pan on top, in simplistic terms, from a single ton. So you get, from your mash tun, you do the first one. So you get two different worts at different gravities, which you can either blend together equally, or you can blend together at different ratios to make your different beers. And that was the basis. And at Brick Lane, you had these 6 tons, 3 of which would go to 1 copper. So you'd have 4 copper brews coming off of the same grist. You'd have 4 different strengths. You've got 4 to mix. More fun. But when you're brewing these high gravity beers, you can take this first one, which can be quite strong. It can be a 90 degree OG wort, 1090.
Well, that's like with Golden Pride. That's basically around that, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, they use 1080 something. I think Golden Pride is 1085 or something. Yeah, it's just first wort. Yeah.
Well, with a tiny little bit of later wort to get it to the right gravity.
Yeah, to break it down to the right gravity. Yeah.
But I mean, it's basically mostly first wort, isn't it?
Yeah. And there's a wonderful technique, actually, which is probably not many brewers taught it, but they used to teach it in Germany a lot as well, because, I mean, it was obviously the same technique that they used throughout the world. I mean, it wasn't unusual. But nowadays, you wouldn't do it and everybody plugs it into a machine. But because it was all done by hand, to blend worts to give you your final required original gravity that you want for the beer, if you're blending worts, all sorts of different ways. But we used to use something called the brewer's cross. You may come across that in the literature sometime, which is just our way of working out how to blend 2 worts at a given volume to give you the right volume at the right OG. And we used to call it the brewer's cross. It's fairly simple. It's 2 simultaneous algebraic equations, well, 1 simultaneous equation, but it's quite a simple technique. But not many brewers could do it nowadays, I doubt.
Because I was wondering about this. I was just about to ask you a question about this, about how you made these calculations for parti-gyling. But
that's what I did most of the day doing.
But what happens if you've got 4 worts and you're making 3 beers out of them?
Yeah.
How does that work?
How do you decide what goes where? Well, that's what I spent most of my year learning how to do, almost. We work it out on a slate. We had a slate. And when I joined Young's, we were doing it again then, and they still do it a bit at Fuller's. But we had a slate because you were constantly changing. So you get the first wort gravity. Now, once you got the first wort gravity, you know how much of your theoretical extract that you've used to get your first wort, because you've got the volume and you've got the gravity. Then you can say, right, the other 3 worts have got this much. So if I want to blend them to give me a 1045 beer, I need this much of the first wort and this much of the other 3 worts.
Okay.
And then, all right, so you say, right, okay, and then you get the blokes to put it out, and we used to put out a rough so that when you got the second wort, you could do the calculation and refine it a bit more. So each time you got another bit of information, you could refine how much you told them to put in, because they used to have to put the first wort into probably up to a dozen different vessels of 3 different gravities, for example. So you'd have 3 at one strength, 4 at another strength, 5 at the final strength, the light out, the 30, the weak stuff.
So you're doing all the blending in the fermenters?
In the fermenters, before you start fermenting.
Okay, because I was thinking this was done in tanks and then distributed to the fermenters.
Because that's the gravity we started at. So it was all blended, and we used to give dips because you didn't have meters in those days. It was all done by dipping. So we used to write out these instructions, give them to the foreman, who would give it to the charge hand, who would give it to the beer work runner, who would run around with all these dips, bringing up the levels, trying to run it, trying to be there at the right point. So it was you used to spend all day mapping out what was going where. And at the end of the day, you had to get them all. And you couldn't, because they were top cropping, you had to get them within a certain distance of the cropping equipment, be that a griffin slide or a parachute or whatever, or if it dropped below. So you couldn't afford to overfill the ton because they had doorways. They would be up to that much of the doorway, and then you put wooden slats in. You see this when you go to places like Harvey's, it's still the same. But they're still doing it, down in Bridport, the Palmers in Bridport, Hook North. You see it. We must go to them together and to explain to you how you do these things and parti-gyling. This is a lost art for modern craft brewing. It really is.
Yeah, no, I keep going on about parti-gyling because it seems to me to be a wonderful technique for producing a lot of different beers if you want to.
Yeah, people will tell you that, we do that, but in reverse. We high gravity brew. The big boys are all high gravity brewing.
Oh,
yeah. So you're doing Becks at 5% alcohol, which is probably brewed at 8% alcohol. You dilute it down to 5%, or say 7%, which is a sort of roundabout the figure most of them are done, 7.5. So you'll produce it at 7.5. You'll produce, because there's economies of scale in terms of vessel capacity, cooling, everything else to produce at high gravity. But then you dilute it down to 5%. But if you want Beck's beer, which is a 4% Beck's, you just add more liquor. But that's not the same as parti-gyling, because we were blending worts with different characteristics. And it ferments as a whole. I'll say that.
One of the things I still don't understand is what Truman's did with their stouts in the late 19th century, right?
Yeah, I'll have to have a look at the records and see if I can help you.
Well, where they parti-gyle them.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, but they would do. They had different strengths.
No, but they parti-gyle them, ferment them, and then blend post-fermentation.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So they'd have 3 different stouts, and the strong one, the Imperial Stout, that would be as fermented. And then they'd be blending most of what they'd fermented as Imperial Stout with the weaker stouts.
That's probably for flavor, Ron. Certainly I've done that. And that was one of the techniques when we first started brewing Tuborg. Because Tuborg in this country was first brought in as a 3% beer.
Yeah.
The Danes didn't want to sell it at 3% really, but the economics was such that, and the marketplace was for low strength beers. So they insisted that we brewed 3 streams of Tuborg lager and then blended. So we used to brew one at 45, 46 or something, another one at 35, and then one at a bigger one, twice as much volume at 25 or 26 or something. And then you blend them together to give you because it was for the flavor profile. That's what their R&D had told them.
And did it make a difference?
difficult to tell because I never really tried the two things side by side, but probably yes, because you will get some of the higher strength flavors in with a lower beer. And we were doing that with some beers in the same way that we spoke about, and we did with the barley wine, in that there was a stock that was blended into other beer, into lower strength beers to make, the Burton, for example.
Okay.
So that you got some of these higher strength flavors present in your lower strength beer. That used to be done, not often, but it was certainly being done.
So were you still brewing a Burton
Yes.
in Brick Lane?
Yeah, Burton closed in about 72.
No, but I mean a Burton, the beer Burton.
Yeah, that was still on. As I say, it was they were still, but we weren't brewing it. Well, were we brewing it? I've got a feeling we were, but there was no. I think it came down from Burton, but I think they blended the stock into that to give it the flavour.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't much. That was right when I joined. They were still producing it. It was a bit like Young's Winter Warmer from memory.
Yeah.
About the same gravity, about 55, only in the winter.
Yeah. No. It's one of these things. Burton, that was like this for the first half of the 20th century, was like quite a popular beer in London, and then it's disappeared without trace, and no one even knows what it is anymore.
No. I mean, it was darker. It was a traditional Burton ale opposed to Burton Pale Ale.
Yeah.
As you know, we did that again on that Past Masters series that we were doing at Fuller's. That was one of the recipes that we did there.
Yeah. Well, that was one of the ones I was really keen on.
Yeah.
The old Burton extra.
I mean, journeys like that. I mean, they teach me an awful lot, and I just had the luck really to have been brought in when it was still a big brewery, but still operating on that very traditional thing, and also the privilege of going to do similar work at both Young's and Fuller's. I mean, in terms of advanced brewing technology, it probably left me very much in a backwater, but I had a lot of fun. I didn't become CEO of some multinational brewery, but would I want to be the CEO of some multinational brewery? I don't think I've been as happy anyway.
Well, no, you got to brew all the time, didn't you?
Yeah, I like brewing. I still like brewing.
So you're still hands-on at
Wimbledon? A little bit, Ron, a little bit. Not much. I did go in and do a little bit of hands-on for this wheat beer mash. And occasionally, if they're short-handed, I'll go in. And nowadays, because they're canning and they're doing things in slightly different ways, the only thing they let me do is brew or watch calves. I can watch calves.
Yeah, I guess I'm going to be over in London in December anyway.
Yeah.
So maybe we could meet up for a pint if you're interested.
I would think that's a highly desirable goal. You're not coming over for GBBF this year, then? You're not coming across for the...
No, it's no, I haven't done that for a while. Yeah, I'm not that keen on beer festivals anymore.
No.
It's too much standing up for me.
Yeah, it can be a bit trying at times. Yeah. So no, it was interesting to live through those changes, and I was quite saddened by it. I mean, I could see a way in which we could have kept part of the old brewery there. We had a lovely pilot brewery, absolutely delightful place, which was, I think, about 10 barrels, I think, that all copper, tower brewery, next door to the brewer's house, where we used to have to walk past it almost when we came out in the morning. And absolutely lovely place. But I thought we could have kept that, produced the wort in the new place, but there was a bit by where the brewer's house is, in the oldest part on the corner of the brewery, called the Old House. And underneath the Old House was where all the racking tanks and the cask was. And I said, well, why don't we just keep the pilot brewery to show the visitors You can produce the wort and then put it across into our slate vessels here to ferment, drop it down to the racking tanks which are underneath, drop it down to the racking machine, and then it goes into in the cellars, and then it's in the cellars for your cask beer. But no, we're a modern brewery, all keg, and that's it. And the production director at the time, lovely man, Hector Lang, he was a brewer. He came from Bass, and he was an absolutely delightful man. And we had this conversation at a dinner once, and I remember Hector saying to me, "We'll never brew cask beer in Brick Lane again." And so I said, "Well, I've been chastened here. I better be quiet." Snotty young lab tech stroke shift brewer speaking to the production director. Time to shut up, Derek. Anyway, I had the occasion quite a few years later when we reintroduced cask beer into Brick Lane to say, "Oh, Hector, do you remember mentioning that we'd never produced it here again?" He said, "Oh, it's nice, though, isn't it?" This is a very funny Scotsman, but he was a lovely man.
But talking about Truman's cask beers,
Yeah,
wasn't the first one tap bitter?
Tap Bitter, yeah.
So
Well,
what was
Tap Bitter? No, yes, I can't remember if Truman S or Tap Bitter. It was one. No, it was Tap Bitter. Yeah, no, Tap Bitter. Yeah, that was designed by our. I'm looking at the clock this time. We've got 6 minutes. That was designed by our R&D, and we weren't that keen on it. So
yeah, I was never that keen on it either.
no, it was designed. There was another one using that bloody awful priming still. I mean, it was just shockingly bad, I thought, and not very nice grist. But then we.
So was that based? It wasn't based on one of the existing beers, then?
No, I don't know where it came from. It was based on something they worked on R&D, and a chap called John Hoggan first introduced that. Who used to head up our R&D. It had some odd things in it anyway. But there was a bit of a change in the wings. John Hoggan got ousted, the MD got ousted, and this is in the early 80s, they rebuilt the image of Truman's in the early 80s. We had this sort of almost supernova thing happen at the end before the brewery closed, of investment and bringing out new beers and trying to bring brewing back to the traditional. And we were a big cask brewery, although it was all in keg, as I mentioned last time. But we brought back the mild, the Truman bitter, the Truman best bitter, and the Samson. I found some pub clips the other day. I think I've got a mild one downstairs.
Oh, right.
I'll show
I
it to you.
really like the mild.
Yeah, but these beers were all right. These beers were based on Mike Sullivan, who was around at the time, myself, and a chap called Nick Ricketts, who were all keen sort of camera members. And we looked at the beers that we liked, and we sort of said, "Well, how do they brew them?" And right, okay, well, let's Marisotto malt or good malt and Foals and Goldings and let's just brew a decent cask beer, and none of this pissing around with.
No, they were very nice.
Get it to work, and they were nice beers, I thought.
I thought they were pretty good as well. Yeah. I mean, it was great because there were lots of Truman's pubs, and a lot of the Truman's pubs were still really nice buildings.
Yeah. And they did some of the original signage, of course, and of course the new, when they reinvented the brand, they just revisited the old signage. They turned the eagle round a bit and made it slightly different, but apart from that, it looked pretty original. It was good. We took away all the horrible plastic that covered up all those lovely tiled signs and things, in this corporate 70s image. God, it was awful. And tried to reinvent ourselves because they were losing trade to people like Fuller's and Young's and all the other big brewers were bringing back their long dead brands as well.
Like Taylor
Walker and things like that. So, but it was a great period. I mean, I loved all of that. I could get back to brewing again and making beers as opposed to just in the same beer over and over again, pressing the button.